Okay, I think we are live. So I'm going to hop on over to YouTube and grab the YouTube link. But let me know when you're here and that you can see me and hear me. YouTube says I'm live. That's a good sign. And it appears that the correct title is being used. Excellent. And it looks like I'm live on Facebook. Awesome. All right, dropping the link to YouTube if anyone wants to swap over, and posting it in its own thread so that it's easy to find. And like always, if your friends aren't on Facebook but you think that they would enjoy this, please share the YouTube link with them, and it can always be found on my YouTube channel. So if they subscribe to me on YouTube, I think they get an email or something, or some sort of notification when I go live, similar to Facebook. So you guys are here. Am I better now, Christina? Sound like I'm underwater. That's terrible. Good morning, Lynn. Sound like I'm underwater. That's not a good sign. I'm using the phone like I normally do, so that would be weird. Let me know if it doesn't get better, and I will try something different. It should be fairly okay. Okay, cool. Maybe I was mumbling in the beginning. I'm glad it's better now. Awesome. All right, so tonight we are talking about dogs that, and I think we've all experienced this or seen it, or even experienced it to some degree, right? Even if it didn't keep us from competing or keep us from progressing in competition, I think, oh my goodness, Dave, get over the glare. Nothing I can do about it. That's so weird, Christina, that the volume is different because I'm closer. You're not hearing cars, are you? I am closer to those windows, so technically I'm closer to the highway, but by about 2 feet. So I hope it's not the cars in the background. I chose this room as my office before like 7 years ago, 8 years ago, so I didn't know it was going to be a problem. All right, well, if you are having problems with the sound, maybe exit out, come back in. I don't know. I'm sorry. But I will try to project the whole time, and I'll try not to get rambly and mumbly. So anyways, I think everyone has experienced this on some level, this where our behaviors in competition aren't, maybe they're just not quite as fast, or they're not quite as precise, or they're maybe just a little bit more distracted. And then we have the really extreme cases where they they don't want to work, or they're much slower, or they're much more distracted, or they're running, but they're acting as if they've never seen agility before, or they are acting like they don't want to be there, or they're zooming around the ring. So there's this wide variety of differences. And so if you're experiencing kind of an extreme difference, like full 360 from the dog you're used to training, you might have more than one kind of issue going on, or that's just your dog's temperament. So the first thing always that I kind of go over when someone brings me this problem, and I won't talk about it forever, I just can't talk about the topic without bringing it up, especially if someone is listening to me for the first time, and if so, welcome. But when you have such, and to me, the more extreme differences probably, or I don't know, maybe that's not true. Anyway, when I have these differences, and it's not that the dog is just behaving not normally, even in the context of the same day, you go out to practice and they're fine at home, and then you go to a trial and all hell breaks loose. I would always check the dog's health and well-being first, just because things can flare up under stress. And that's not to say, remember, not all stress is bad stress. This talk, I'm enjoying it, but it is stressful, right? It is something, it's a performance, essentially. I'm having to talk to myself and not get anxious about what you guys all might be thinking right now. It's stress. So even if your dog enjoys competition, it's still a form of stress on their bodies and minds. So they might have some underlying condition that isn't showing up on a day-to-day basis, and then when put under the stress of a competition, it's making them feel like crap, and so it makes them behave unnormally, okay, abnormally. So definitely, if you're experiencing these differences, you're going to feel a lot better going down the rabbit holes of looking for health issues. You're just going to feel a lot better knowing you did that than ignoring that possibility, doing a lot of training and a lot of rehab, only to find out a couple years later, if you had solved the health issues, it might have solved all the problems. Okay. And then also, and I promise I don't get any commissions on sending people to Sarah, but she's got the best program out there for your dog's behavioral well-being, right? So check out her steps to behavioral wellness, because I also find when the dog's needs aren't being met, they can't cope with the trial environment. They just don't have it in them. And I think we would feel the same way. We don't perform as well when our needs aren't being met, right? If you didn't get enough sleep, you're not going to be able to function as well the next morning, or at least I'm not able to function the next morning. If I fuel my body in a way that makes me feel yucky, I'm not going to be able to work as well the next day. So things like that. So check that out first and foremost. Make sure your dog's needs are met before you're asking them to perform in these stressful situations. So that's the only like soapboxy thing, probably. I don't make any promises though, but check those things first, please. At least check them before setting up a private consultation with me, because I'm going to ask you to anyway, so do that first. Okay. Next, I want to go over what other things might be happening that might be contributing to your dog's different behaviors, your dog's different personalities, from training or a class environment to competition. And the first one that I want to bring up is the time of day. And this, it might be weird, it might not be something you've ever thought about, but think of when you go to class, when you go to train just at home, think of your weekly, everyday schedule. Maybe not right now. Maybe you're working from home more, so it would your dog schedule is changing. We can get to that later if you want. But think of your normal pre-pandemic weekly routine. You might have gotten up early. You go to work. You come home. You feed them. Maybe you do a little bit of training. Maybe you go to class. And then think of what that dog's typical routine is like when you go to a dog show, when you go to a trial. That routine is probably really different. So the time of day when you're asking your dog to work might be impacting your dog's ability to work. Some dogs, it's not going to matter at all. So you might be thinking, oh my gosh, Megan, you're insane. Because that's how I would feel if someone told me that about one of my border collies. I would say, you're crazy. There's no way time of day affects them. But a long time ago, I was at USDA Nationals, and it was pretty common that the steeplechase finals on Saturday evening, they didn't even start before like 7 or 8 p.m. It was insane how late you would be staying up Saturday night and then have to get up Sunday morning to compete again. It's a marathon, that event. And I remember waiting in line, and I had a small dog, and one of the other small dog owners, teeny tiny Papillon owners, was so afraid of the timing because she needed to be able to feed her dog to keep the dog's blood sugar levels up to last her all day. And that blew my mind. Okay, so I don't have dogs that they need to eat on a set schedule, right? Like teeny tiny Papillon, she can't just feed him a huge meal, but it's teeny tiny, right? But she can't, because she's getting so little, she can't like miss a meal. She needs to, so things like that has to have an impact on more than just that dog in particular, right? And so that's kind of stayed with me for a long time. That's probably been 10 years ago when I was standing in line, and she was very concerned about making sure that this dog had enough time to have a meal and digest it so that she could run with proper blood sugar levels. And I thought that was so cool. So who knows? And I know for a fact that even when we're just hanging out around the house, if Shrek settles down for a nap, you guys have seen the pictures on Facebook, right? The dog sleeps like the dead. It's significantly harder for me to convince him, hey, you want to go train? Even just training. It's so much more difficult to convince him to wake up and go to a training session if he's in the middle of his nap time. And it was enough of a concern when he was a young dog that when I was thinking ahead to trialing, I kind of did. I worked on it, waking him up, seeing how long would it take me to wake him up and warm him up and get him ready to run when he's in that zombie-like state. Because it's not just open the crate and he's out. No. He's a zombie, right? So these things matter. And so hopefully, if some of you are going, wow, that's so my dog, time of day, just practice, right? I'm sure Shrek is a stuffed animal you use or prop, obviously. I mean, that dog, he just sleeps everywhere. He's amazing. Just the easiest dog to live with ever. Not ever, but you know. Okay, so time of day. Maybe it has something to do with their food. Maybe it has something to do with just their typical routine, right? And how different it can be on just your normal day where you might train them for a few minutes, or going to class, or going to a trial. It's really different. The schedule is different. Windy sounds like a teenage boy. When does he stop being a teenage boy, though? He'll be 5 in October, because I agree. But I'm wondering when, I mean, is he just going to be teenage boy, old man? Like, is it ever, I don't know. I have no idea how it's going to work out. But he sleeps and eats like a teenage boy. I agree. You can't fill him up by them. I've never seen him look fat or bloated or anything. He's amazing. Okay, so on that note, so now we can talk about a little bit about routines. And we sort of talked about those last week, how I try to set up my sessions differently so that the dog knows what's happening. I got distracted by Dave's comment. I'm going to come back to that in a second, Dave. We need to be consistent about our routines in the same way that we talked about last week. So if you are training just at home and you never use a leash, you just walk outside and start training and everything's fine, but then when you get to class, you have a leash on for some of the time, but then you take the leash off kind of casually and you get to work and it's no big deal. I'm trying to get out of the sun. It's on fire. And then when you go to a trial, everything is completely different. So the dogs very quickly learn that divide between training looks like this and there's food around. Class looks like this and there's food around. Trials looks like this, there's no food around. And there's more to that, but those routines set up the context for the dog, okay? So I'm not saying that our routines need to be the same. I'm saying, like we talked about last week, the dog just needs to be prepared for which one is which, okay? But it also, I want to talk a little bit about, because it comes into the next thing, I'm going to talk about environment. But these routines especially come into play when we train and trial at the same location. And I asked this in the group, if this is something you do, if you're able to train and trial in the same location, how have you noticed it impacts your dog's performance? And if you haven't read those comments, I really encourage you all to go back, find that thread, and read those comments, because there was a wide variety of responses. A couple of people said, my dog doesn't care about environment, it doesn't matter. Totally, that exists. My 2 border collies don't give a rat's patoot where we are. If there's equipment, we're doing agility here, right? There could probably be sheep in the field next to agility and they would still agility. They just see the equipment and they turn on. They understand that context. They're not sensitive to those things. Shrek has a huge, where I used to work is big enough to have 2 full rings. And when he was a puppy, one of the rings, that's the ring that I was teaching in, always had all the equipment in it, and the other ring was mostly empty. And so didn't have much in it, or I could put, it was for foundation classes, so I could move stuff to the side. So I would go to the other empty ring to play ball with him and to work on his toy skills. And when I put him into a puppy class in that ring, in the foundation ring, he couldn't work in that ring for like the first 3 weeks, because the expectation of that environment was play ball. He only had ball feelings in that ring. But I could walk him to the ring next door that shares a wall, and he could do all the other things, because that environment, that routine, that expectation did not have ball feelings. It had foodie work feelings. So eventually I changed that context for him through routines and showing him, look, even though we're in the ring that you expect balls, we're doing this routine, which is our training routine. Look, I have all the food. There's no balls here, right? I didn't use balls in training until it was a cooperative thing, but still the environment was attached to ball feelings. So we have this happening sometimes when we trial where we train, because the dog walks in expecting class and gets whopped in the face with not class, right? So the dog walks in expecting ball play, gets whopped in the face with gotta learn something, and that's stressful. That's hard. So for some dogs, that is causing some conflict. And I used to see it all the time working at this facility. It's where trials were also happening. And I would come back into class on Monday and those dogs were relieved. They always did their best work the Monday after a trial because they walked in and they were like, oh, thank God, it's back to normal. The people are gone, the dogs are gone. My handler is sane again. All right, and we'll get to that in a second too. But the dog's expectation was wrapped up in that environment, and that does depend on the routines. So I would definitely put effort into making those routines very clear, those start of work routines very clear, so that the dog knows what to expect. Okay? And we're going to talk a lot more once I go through this list about like what you can do. And of course, if you have questions about what you can do, please put them in the comments. So environment we can talk about all day because some dogs are going to be more environmentally sensitive than others, right? I just said my border collies, if they see agility equipment, that's enough to pretty much override anything. They're going to work. But there are going to be some dogs that they have noise sensitivities, and that's a huge wide spectrum of functional kind of notices, and not functional just melts to the ground at noises, right? So there's noise sensitivity, there's people sensitivity, there's dog sensitivity. There's a lot of pressure at trials that can make environments really difficult for dogs. So of course environment can play a factor, but I do find that it does affect dogs, but it's not usually the first thing I go to. Okay, but then we do have the expectation piece. I'm going to answer Eve's question. You suggest a trial routine? Absolutely. My day looks completely different. So you have one, whether you know it or not, right? When I get ready for a trial, it looks completely different than if I'm getting ready to go to a training thing. It just looks different. I'm probably up earlier. I'm feeding them a bit earlier. I'm walking them a bit earlier. I'm packing slightly different things. So whether you know it or not, you've got one, so you should train it and kind of use it religiously to your advantage. When we go to a trial that has a match, we enter the match and no problem. But when the trial is the next day, it's like he knows very little and is so slow. Okay, so we're going to get to this in just a second, Linda, because I think it's going to be the perfect segue into what I think is the biggest factor causing this divide in our dogs. But this expectation of the environment is a pretty big thing. Okay, so keep that in mind. And the last thing that I think is, Eve, yes, the routine is, I mean, there's also a separate trial routine versus training routine, and we talked about that last week. So the dogs have the expectation of when we walk into this ring, you are working, versus when we walk into this ring, you are training. And so I went into all the details of that last week. But I think the biggest difference between training and trialing for our dogs is us. I think we are the biggest factor that's different. We put it out there that that this is different. Our cues are different. How we handle it's different. Our reactions to the dog's behavior is different. Our expectations are different. So we are this screaming, blinking light of you're at a trial now, act differently. It's not a very exciting answer, but good news is it's usually easier to change your behavior because we can talk about it in English back and forth and have a dialogue about it. Here's the little bit of the caveat is it could start as just a you issue, which is usually where it does begin. And a lot of times these you issues, they show up as tiny differences. Like, well, he just broke his stay a little bit early. Or he just released his contact a little bit early. Or he only looked at the ring crew for a second. But we still are qualifying, so it's not a problem. Right? I mean, if you were all in front of me, I would say raise your hand if your dog flew through novice, did pretty well in open, and shit hit the fan when you got into excellent. Or whatever the level, right? Yeah, raise all your hands. Because you're deteriorating things over time. So what started as just a little bit of a you issue, a little bit of change in how you handle and how you react, and now the dog has learned that the rules are different. The contingencies are different. Everything is different, and so the behavior gets worse and worse over time. Okay? I'm going to grab a couple of comments and Lizzie says, I felt like trialing with Icky was pretty low baggage and it was surprisingly consistent from venue to venue. Icky was this magical I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know, but magical unicorn that he's the perfect dog. He's a perfect dog, Lizzie. You know this. And he had damn good training. You know this too. So I think I've been observing this, and I talked with a client earlier today that this is holding true for trials at home as well. The dogs are behaving differently. And I think this comes back to how we behave differently and the expectation of the dog. Because let's talk about trialing at home for a second. It can't be the environment if you're trialing at home, because I think most of us would say our dogs are pretty great at home. We don't have these problems at home. But I'm seeing it and I'm hearing it from people that dogs are struggling in the same way when they run the trialing at home courses as they would in a competition. They're seeing the same mistakes. They're seeing those trial only behaviors pop up. And that, to me, screams expectation of the environment, and you, the handler, are very different. Okay? Linda, nope, not Bronco. Which bit? Like he just started off never good, or just elaborate a little bit. Okay? So I think those are the main things that I think cause these problems. That it can start as a tiny divide and it can become a very big thing very quickly, regardless of if it's one of these things or if it's a combination of several of these things. Okay, so now we are going to talk about what we can do differently, either to prevent it or to try and fix it. And I think this is a really good time to try and fix it because we can't, I think most of us cannot be competing every weekend. I also think that's a problem. I think the lack of treats on us is also known by our dogs, whether at home or a trial. Absolutely. That's part of you being different. So, and a little bit like we talked about last week, that I mean, I could probably go on and on all day, that because of these other things, they are not prepared to do the things in a trial without food present. So definitely the lack of reinforcers on you makes a difference. But if you do what we talked about last week, if they have, it's about the expectation. If you go into a place and they're expecting food and they don't get it, that is the definition of disappointment. Disappointment is expecting one thing and getting another. So if you're feeling like your dogs are disappointed to be trialing, then their expectations were wrong. I'm trying to recreate the pressure element with a private training group. We get together weekly. We like each other, but we're all quite competitive. It's interesting. My dog is consistently surprising me with how good she is. That's fantastic, Eve. So that is going to be like your mental task of going into competitions confident that your dog knows what she's doing and that you know what you're doing, right? There's a huge mindset piece to this. Because if you expect your dog to get it wrong, well, don't be surprised when they make a mistake. So it should be the other way around. You should have the expectations you should have realistic expectations. You can't expect your dog to do something you haven't taught them how to do. But if you've put in the effort to test their skills in a systematic way, you should be able to enter a competition relatively confident. And then, look at your nose, things like that. It's a cycle. Started off barking at Judge and everything that moved, but he is in Masters now, barely. Okay, so Linda, that's a little bit of a more complicated issue, because if he's reacting to things like that, he probably doesn't feel safe in the environment. And if you don't feel safe, you can't perform to your highest ability. I think I've probably told this story before, but I do remember teaching in-person classes, and my student was there and her daughter was there. And I didn't know it, but this woman's husband is a police officer. And so I'm teaching, yada, 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 yada. And into the building walks this police officer, and he's walking around like a police officer, and he's fully uniformed, and he's walking around, he's looking around, he's not stopping and talking to anyone yet, he's just walking around and looking around, and I couldn't do my job. I couldn't, because I was there, owners of the facility weren't there, I was the one in charge of the building, and I'm trying to teach the student in front of me, but I couldn't until I figure out who he was, why he was there. It helped that my student's daughter ran and jumped into his arms, but I couldn't focus until that question, is everything okay, was answered. And then I got back to my job like it was no big deal. So there is a big element there. Okay? So let's talk about what we can do about it. The time of day stuff. So if you do feel like your dog struggles because of the abrupt change in their routine and they're not so go with the flow type, or maybe they do have some different needs in regards to their meal schedule, right? If they're getting fed earlier and later, like if you're burning both ends, you're feeding them earlier on competition days because you're waking up earlier and then they're getting fed even later, right? So things might be different. Prepare the meal schedule differently. Maybe they need 3 meals a day to get them through a trial. Prepare if you can, to the best of your ability, prepare the change in schedule a day or two before the competition. Okay? Kind of treat it like you would when you would go to a different time zone. In a perfect world, you would give yourself a day to reset to that time zone, especially like the bigger the change, the more time you would need to acclimate. When I went to Germany to compete, they're something like, I think they're 8, 9, at least 9 or 10 hours ahead, right? I needed to reset. So I got there several days, 3 or 4 days at least, before I needed to be a functional version of myself. Probably a little bit more than functional. It was a pretty big event, but you get what I'm saying. The bigger the change, the more time you might need into putting the dog on that schedule. Okay. I don't think that's going to be a huge thing for very many dogs, but maybe it helps someone. 2, routines. Get more consistent about your procedures surrounding training, class as training, and then working sessions and competitions, right? So go back, listen to last week's talk, listen to, I'm sure we've talked about start routines or end routines, or I've done some webinars on it, but get really consistent on providing the context clues your dog needs, because we don't want them paying attention to the context clues of people, right? Or dogs present. We don't want them to associate lots of dogs with this is going to be hard, right? We don't want them to choose their own context clues. We don't want them to associate the presence of a judge being the cue to them that this is hard, act differently, right? So if we have those procedures from the get-go, you're going to have an easier time. And this kind of goes into it, the same thing in that environment. Get them comfortable with the routines surrounding that environment and that expectation. So go to trials without the expectation of running the dog, and just do their routines. Get them ready to run. And then instead of running, go get their cookie jar and take them for a walk. It's a cheaper way to find out if your dog is going to be okay. All right? We have trialing at home right now. This is a fantastic time to train and put your routines into play without the added pressure of the environment. I think is brilliant. I hope that trialing at home is here to stay, because I think it is an amazing split for the dogs mentally, and for your training, because it forces you to practice at home without your food and toys on you, so that your dog doesn't just see that picture in competition, because again, that would be a cue to them. It would be context. Oh, well, we're here, we're in this environment. It becomes very predictable, right? When we only work the dogs without food at a trial, they attach it to all of that. So the trialing at home gives us that ability to have a pretty comfortable environment and not having to deal with dogs and people. But we can practice our ready to work routines and our food and toys off of our body. We can test our skills in a safe environment. And we can collect even more data, like Eve was saying with her practice group. We can collect that data that says, yeah, no, my dog has these skills, and by the way, so do I. Okay? Because our brains are driven to respond to the data we have. And we look for the data that supports the story we want to tell. Okay? So you can use training to collect good data, and you can use trialing at home to collect good data. I think there are good ways to use trialing at home and bad ways to use trialing at home. Maybe it deserves its own chat, but if you have questions about it, please ask me. The other thing I think the trialing at home will help you is with you. Since we talked about you, the general you, the handlers, us, me as well. We cause a lot of these issues because we are different. If you trial at home, even if you don't trial at home, just film everything you do, you will be nervous. You will be a little bit worried about, did the camera see that? Oh my gosh, what do I look like in front of the camera? Oh my gosh, am I always this slow? Right? You'll feel, even though I think you should work on those feelings and not feel those feelings, or put those feelings to good use, right? Mindset. The camera does add that layer of pressure to you. Dog doesn't give a crap if you've got a camera on. Unless you're my dogs, because my dogs know if the camera comes out, you're training, so they like it. But the camera adds a layer of pressure to you. And I think we talked about this last week too, about, you know, just turning the camera on is like a defiance of progress. It's kind of amazing, right? Because I think there's a certain amount of our nerves that we're not going to get rid of, right? But it's not bad. Stress, good stress, whatever. So practicing that and kind of showing the dogs like, look, yeah, I'm a little bit nervous, I'm a little bit stressed out, but I'm still normal, I'm still me. Helps fill in that divide between training and trialing. So that when you go to a competition, a real in-person competition, they can go, all right, there are people here, there are dogs here, but I'm familiar with this routine. And my mom, she's a little bit weird, but I'm comfortable with this amount of weird. They will give you the type of performance that goes with these things. Does that make sense? Am I making sense? And I think just overall, we need to make sure that the dogs are prepared for what we're asking them to do in a competition. I don't think knowing the obstacles is enough to enter a competition. I don't think going to a bunch of trials and hanging out and socializing at trials is enough. I don't think those things alone make your dog prepared to do agility in a competition. Some dogs, it is plenty, but I think for most dogs, and probably those of you that are watching, it wasn't enough. Nervous at first, more nervous when first posting, but again, what do I care? Exactly. I mean, a little bit like, who the heck cares? Honestly, no one is watching you. No one cares about anyone more than they care about themselves, which is fine. It doesn't bother me. I'm just saying. Post your stuff. It's for you more than it is for me. My dogs love the sound of the camcorder being turned on and the beep that happens when I press the record button. Yeah, ditto. Mine too. Yeah, I worry about if I've done something wrong. Even if you do something wrong, it's no big deal. I mean, it's kind of the same, right? We don't get freaked out if the dogs make a mistake. No one, especially at an agility trial, no one is standing at the end of the run with a shotgun to your head. It's going to be fine. Okay, dog trains perfectly and shuts down at a trial. Well, we have covered a lot of ground, so I really encourage you to just watch the recording and let me know after if you have any questions. So now I am turning it over to you guys to ask me questions about everything I just talked about. weave perfectly and won't leave it at trial. This is super common, and um, I think when it's very specific to an obstacle, I think everything that I did talk about, so when you watch the recording, it will apply. But we also have to consider that the weave pulls probably take more concentration for some dogs than others, or if it's physically challenging, it requires more brain space for the dog. So if they are using their brain space on other things, they just don't have anything left for the weaving itself. So that's a pretty common issue. The other thing is, I mentioned it just moments before you logged in, that I don't think the dogs are always prepared to complete the obstacles under the added pressure of the competition. And so we do have to get pretty smart about adding in layers of proofing and adding in layers of understanding of our dog's obstacle skills. And that, it's not always easy, for sure. But I do think we can overall enhance our dog's understanding of obstacle skills a lot more before entering them in a competition. When I set up your handling exercises for handler only and leave Raz inside, he goes crazy. He doesn't care if I go outside to do anything else. I think it's because when Kay is talking about my handler mechanics class, and it's probably because you went and you like set everything up, and you probably put your agility shoes on, and you started to do the routine that usually means we're doing agility. And when we do agility at home, it usually means all good things. Handler's normal, food's flying everywhere, I'm at home in my backyard, I'm happy. So there's this huge positive conditioned emotional response to you getting ready to go outside and train. So then when they're not invited, it's a problem. Smack is getting quite upset with me because he's 12 now, so he doesn't do as many of the demo dog videos, and so I get everything ready to go train, and then I don't put him in the car, and he just has the saddest face. And quite honestly, even if he doesn't do agility, if I just put him in the car and take him with me, it satisfies him enough. Or if it just let him run around the agility field while I'm doing something, it satisfies him enough. But he does not like seeing the routine happen and then not be included in it. So I definitely understand that. Does your ready to work routine serve as a bridge to a trial routine? Absolutely, because my ready to work routine, I will mimic it. It's pretty much the same. So go back and watch last week's chat because I talked about it in depth. Best advice for making the most of a non-for-competition run. So not for competition means you can bring a toy into the ring, and depending on the show, you might be able to put food into a specific area and run and go get the food. So it depends on where I'm at in my dog's competition career. If trialing was very new to them, or they had never done it before, if I was getting ready to compete, I would go into that competition environment as a training situation. So I would put it out there that I would use my ready to learn routine. I would show them, look, we're going in, I have the toy, or I have the food, whatever. Here it is, this is how it's going to be, because then I can train and reinforce behaviors the way I would in training in that environment. Search for it in this group because we did a whole thread way back when I was I think when I was first starting this group, maybe in January, because I went and I posted a couple of videos of how I use not for competition as training runs. She knew I had the toy. I So she went in, she knew it was training in that environment. Okay. The other way I would do it is I would stash it somewhere or stash it on my body and surprise the dog. But I would do that sparingly because I don't want that to become the expectation. And I would pretty quickly have it at the end. Okay. So I could do it either way, but the routine sets up the expectation. So if they are getting reinforcement in the ring, I'm probably going to say, hey, we're going in there to train, not to work. Probably. Have you ever done a great run and find no one saw it? Well, mostly, yeah, exactly. No, well, mostly no one is watching or caring. This is the most vain thing that I have ever felt, or I feel like I've ever felt, but it bothered me for so long that I would have this most like fantastic run ever, and not one person was clapping when I finished. Not one person, or anything, right? It would always kind of, it's in the beginning, I was like freaking out, like, did I miss a jump? Did I run the course back? Like, did I run it wrong? Like, it was the most amazing run ever and no one noticed. So exactly. I mean, it's really helpful. It's something I noticed. And I'm one that the world goes blank to me when I'm running, but as soon as my dog breaks the timer beams to finish, the noise turns back on. And so it's like the silence continuing is deafening. It's very noticeable. Dog leaves the ring to get to other family members. Super food motivated. Now I know we need an end of run routine, treat, stash, skills. Thanks to Sarah. Yep, she's one smart lady. Other tips to overcome stress about leaving family outside the ring. Make it a part of the routine. So the same way we teach our dogs that, okay, we're going to leave the stash here, we're going to leave family here too. So I would put that into the layer of the routine and just make it the dog's choice of, okay, we're getting ready to work. I need you to walk away from the people. Make it the dog's choice. And you can play around with this. Because I've run other people's dogs for them quite a lot, some dogs, they need to know where their person is, and that person needs to stay put. So if the person is at the start gate when the dog goes in, the person needs to stay there. Because then if the person moves, something's changing and the dog can't cope with it. Sorry, I'm getting notifications coming in. So keep that into the dog's perspective. The other thing is that some dogs do way better if they're just out of sight, period. So when I would run some people's dogs, they just weren't allowed in the building. Too bad. But just make it part of the routine. I love the idea of clarity around reward placement. Show my dog the toys, etc. on the chair table. We'll try that tomorrow at group. I do it for obedience, not agility. Obedience trainers have been doing this smart stuff for a while because they need really good, precise work for long periods of time. Come on, agility people, catch up. We have to do this too. I've done FEO and carried a toy with me and he would do great. Doesn't care about stopping to play with the toy, but does better. I would hand off the toy before going in the ring, but no go. So tricking them doesn't work. I mean, it works on the less clever ones, but that's not what we want to do. So he's saying that I can do the things if there's the possibility of something being in it for me, even if he won't play with the toy. But he's saying in the absence of any potential reinforcers, this is a no-go. So he probably needs a greater reinforcement history for each obstacle. So reinforcing things differently, more rings sustainably, and also more clear routines surrounding the expectations you have. I will also say that having attended quite a few agility fun matches or FEO things or not for competition things. You, the general you, and me included, handlers are different when we have reinforcers on us. We are more relaxed. It's because we have our safety blanket. Food and toys are as much of a safety blanket for us as they are for the dogs. So just keep that in mind, that if you aren't practicing without your safety blanket, then the dog doesn't know what to do either. Interesting to use your training routine for NFC runs. Yeah, because if I'm going to be actively pulling that toy out and reinforcing, I'm training. I'm not working. Working implies that it is an effort session and I'm going to be sequencing, and there is no opportunity to earn reinforcement until we leave the ring. And I'm going to try really hard to not muddy that. I might even go as far as wearing my training vest in a non-for-competition run. But in a competition run, no way. Oh no, have a good dinner. Other than headphones, strategies for negativity during course walking. I mean, the easiest way is headphones. The slightly more obnoxious, cheekier way is to answer back. So I started with headphones and I worked up to answering back. Thanks for coming, Gwen. Have a good evening. Kira has noticed that she is very different when she is without food on her body, getting ready for her dog's CGC. Yes, it is such a safety blanket. John, I want to still think of more strategies for negativity. This definitely is a mindset thing, that even if you don't answer back that person out loud, you should be answering that person back in your head, so that you are you're not allowing their problems to become your problems. So it's all, and if it helps you to visualize actual barriers surrounding your thoughts, you would, and you can think of your brain as your yard, you wouldn't let other people dump their trash in your yard. So it a lot of times in my mindset class, people came up with these great visualizations for keeping other people's garbage out of their brain. I don't understand negativity during course walking. I think what John is referring to is people complaining about the course design in general, or talking about how this is really hard, or talking about how, oh, their dog is for sure just gonna, oh, this is a bar waiting to happen, or, oh man, my dog's definitely going into the wrong end of the tunnel. So people just walking around kind of fortune telling their gloom, not realizing that they are spewing their garbage at everyone else. So that, I mean, we can use, like right now, it's a little bit better. Everyone should be walking the course wearing a mask, so maybe their garbage is a little bit muffled. So we can use that visualization. COVID trials have had us line up like 8 dogs in advance. Oh my gosh, that's a lot. And all stay on X's 8 feet apart. So hard to make a routine that takes so long and structured, and then gotta run. Tricky. This is true. So I think this is something we should pay pretty close attention to if your dogs are sensitive to the routines changing. That we might have to train different routines for the new COVID precautions we are seeing at trials. So it may mean your dog is going to have to wait in line longer than normal. So it might require a bit more training. So like if we talked like we talked about last week with Ready to Work with Shrek, where I don't want to feed him, I would have to make sure that he's okay waiting his turn, either being held or standing on my feet or doing a downstay for longer periods of time without reinforcement. Um, or maybe we'll see different things evolve of these routines. I went to one event once. It was an international event, and they would kind of line us up similarly. They would line you up about 3 at a time, but you had your own box to hang out in. And if you've ever watched the Agility World Championships, I think they do something similar. That everyone has their own space, and you can have your food in that box, you can have your toys in that box. But then what do you do with your stuff, right? You're in a box, and you move from one box to the next box to then into the ring. But at this particular event, the leash runner, you'd have a basket. You put all your crap in a basket, and the leash runner would just take your basket to the end. So maybe as these things develop, and I kind of hope some of these COVID precautions stick around, but that you might just have to, I mean, that might be a great idea. Instead of having an individual leash, have a basket, basically, and the baskets can be sanitized, and all your junk can, food, toys, leash, whatever, can be put into the basket, and then your basket will be at the end. So whatever the trial routine is looking like now, we need to take the time to prepare our dogs for this change. And I know everyone is itching to compete, but it might mean taking some time off competing again to kind of reorganize your routines and get them ready. Okay, you guys, if you get one more question snuck in there, I will answer it. But it is 6:33, so I'm going to be looking at wrapping this up. You guys had some fantastic questions and insight into this. And I thank you so much for joining me. I want to say that next week we're talking about Shrek, but I will confirm that in the next couple of days. Awesome. So I am going to call it. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will see you all next week.